Ultra-processed foods are not just a dietary inconvenience or a source of empty calories. They represent one of the most pervasive and dangerous drivers of cardiometabolic disease across the entire lifespan. The risks they create, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and systemic inflammation, do not appear suddenly in adulthood. They begin early, accumulate silently, and accelerate with age. What makes these foods especially insidious is how they exploit biological weaknesses at every stage of life, gradually eroding metabolic stability until chronic illness becomes almost inevitable. The research linking long-term ultra-processed food consumption to cardiometabolic decline is not only growing, but increasingly alarming. In adolescence, early exposure begins laying the groundwork for future disease. Teenagers who consume high volumes of processed snacks, sugary beverages, fast food, and packaged meals experience sharper blood sugar spikes and more erratic insulin responses than adults, due in part to still developing metabolic pathways. Studies have shown that adolescents with the highest intake of ultra-processed foods exhibit early signs of insulin resistance, elevated triglycerides, and higher blood pressure, even when their weight appears normal. The danger here is subtle but enormous. Metabolic dysfunction can develop quietly for years before outward signs appear. Ultra-processed diets also impair vascular flexibility in youth, a hidden precursor to hypertension in later decades. By the time these individuals reach their 20s or 30s, their cardiometabolic baseline is already compromised. As young adults move through early adulthood, the risks intensify. Many rely heavily on ultra-processed foods due to time pressures, low income, convenience, or stress. Research consistently shows that high consumption of these foods increases the risk of early-onset hypertension, fatty liver disease, and elevated fasting glucose. Even in people who are not overweight, long-term intake of refined carbs, industrial oils, and additives promotes chronic low-grade inflammation, a known driver of cardiovascular damage. Several longitudinal cohort studies have demonstrated that adults with the highest intake of ultra-processed foods have a significantly higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes within a decade. This pattern is especially troubling because young adults often believe they are too young to face metabolic disease. In reality, the trajectory is already set, and the body is quietly accumulating damage that may not become visible until middle age. By the time adulthood progresses into the 30s and 40s, the cumulative burden becomes far more evident. This is typically when years of metabolic strain begin to surface as stubborn weight gain, rising fasting glucose, elevated LDL cholesterol, or increasing blood pressure. Studies from major research institutions and large-scale population cohorts have consistently confirmed that each additional 10% of daily caloric intake from ultra-processed foods is associated with a significantly higher risk of cardiovascular disease. These foods promote central fat storage, which is the most dangerous type of fat for cardiometabolic health, because it increases insulin resistance and inflammatory cytokines that directly damage blood vessels. Even individuals who believe they eat moderately may be consuming far more ultra-processed ingredients than they realize, through flavored yogurts, breads, sauces, cereals, snack foods, and ready-made meals. Over years, this routine exposure steadily raises the probability of metabolic breakdown. In middle age and older adulthood, the risks escalate sharply. The body becomes less tolerant of blood sugar swings, sodium overload, and chronic inflammation, all of which are heavily driven by processed diets. Older adults who consume high levels of ultra-processed foods show substantially higher rates of hypertension, arterial stiffness, and cardiac inflammation. Several major studies have found that diets high in ultra-processed foods increase the risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular mortality. For example, epidemiological analyses from European and American cohorts reveal that individuals with the highest ultra-processed intake face a 20 to 60% greater risk of heart disease. These foods also interfere with the vascular endothelium, the delicate lining inside blood vessels, making it more susceptible to damage and plaque accumulation. In adults over 50, this effect accelerates dramatically, turning decades of minor metabolic strain into advanced disease. What makes this trajectory particularly dangerous is its invisibility. Early metabolic changes caused by ultra-processed diets rarely produce symptoms until major damage is already done. A teenager may have elevated insulin and not know it. A young adult may experience inflammatory markers rising without any sensation of illness. A middle-aged adult may not realize their arteries are stiffening until hypertension appears. And an older adult may not discover years of chronic metabolic damage until facing a heart attack or stroke. Ultra-processed foods create a slow, progressive deterioration of cardiometabolic stability, often disguising themselves as harmless conveniences. The warning that emerges is stark and deeply unsettling. Cardiometabolic diseases do not simply appear in adulthood. They are built day by day through repeated exposure to ultra-processed foods. The risk compounds, accelerates, and eventually overwhelms the body's regulatory systems. Long-term consumption pushes blood sugar toward instability, blood pressure toward chronic elevation, cholesterol toward dangerous patterns, and the cardiovascular system toward structural weakness. It is not a matter of personal failing or lack of willpower. It is the predictable biological result of diets dominated by products engineered for taste, speed, and profit rather than health. Across every age group, the evidence points to the same conclusion. Ultra-processed foods systematically erode cardiometabolic health. Adolescents begin the cycle, young adults deepen it, middle-aged adults feel the consequences, and older adults pay the highest price. Without recognizing how early and how aggressively these foods accelerate disease risk, individuals may continue eating in ways that set the stage for chronic illness long before they realize what is happening.